but certainly the content and the community and the group of you and us, the work that we've been doing lines up with the goals that we had in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with just a little bit of introductory information. Again, you're at ODNFest2020. Thanks for coming. And let's see if I can get the slide to move, actually. Let me see if my controls are... Nope, we're doing this way. Okay, here we go. So where's the majority of your work taking place right now? Just a little bit of a survey question that we had a little asterisk because it was taking place at the time when you registered. So it might be different now, but it looks like we actually have an even split of an even split. Almost 50% mix of on-site and remote, with the little bit more than half, 100% on-site, 100% remote. And of course, that may have changed by then. We at the State Library are still 100% remote. In my department, some of our managers are going in, so it might be different depending on where you are, but we hope that your work is going well for you. Little bit of housekeeping. Some of the sessions today are set up as webinar mode, and some of them are set up as meetings. That for you and for us have a couple functional differences. Sometimes the chat will be there, sometimes not. But we'll have the Q&A open at all times for you to point your questions to ODN staff or the speakers or any other questions that you have about anything that we could try to answer for you. We're all librarians here. We can try to do a quick Google search if we need to. Go ahead and send those through at any time. And please do be aware also that even if you are familiar with Zoom, or if you're not familiar with Zoom, a lot of times in the drop-down, you'll see you can send a message to an individual person, or just to the panelists, or to the panelists and the attendees. So if there's something that you want to send to us, the host of the event, and not the attendees, you have the ability to do that when the chat is open. We are going to be recording these sessions. This is recording right now. Unfortunately, we're not able to do live captions today. But we do want to have that accessibility option, and they will be available when the recordings are on YouTube. We'll have the YouTube captions feature set up for you. And just a reminder also for virtual grace, the same way that we would in any conference that we were attending in person, you know, we are still sometimes learning the ropes here, and sometimes distractions or disruptions crop up in the background because we all are meshing our work lives and our home lives more so than we ever imagined that we would, but we're all doing a great job. So let's continue to do that today. And we are here today because of support from LSTA and IMLS. That would be the Library Services and Technology Act from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. You may have lowercase l lobbied your federal or state representatives to support IMLS budgets in the past. Thank you for that, and we hope that that continues. We're also here because of all the people in the organizations who work together to work on the planning grant more than a handful of years ago to apply to participate in DPLA and set up this very structure. That's the reason we're here today. So some of those folks are still working with us. Some of them have moved to other organizations, but we're very grateful for their work. We're also grateful for the cultural heritage institutions of all kinds in Ohio who support this project, be it through showing their patrons how to use DPLA and the digitized content from Ohio, or putting a link on their own site, or participating in contributing their materials if they're able to. We're grateful for all of that support, no matter what form it takes. Can't forget to mention the great staff at Toledo Lucas County Public Library, especially John DeWeese. Toledo Lucas County Public Library's Zoom is how we are physically here today, how we are seeing each other's faces and hearing each other's voices. So we are very grateful for that. And for the leadership of Evan Struble and Wendy Knapp, our State Library Director as of just a few months ago, earlier this year. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Wendy Knapp for a few words of introduction.
Thank you so much, Jen, and big thank you to John and Toledo Lucas County for the use of the Zoom rooms today. This is going to be really helpful and really help have a collaborative session, so I'm excited to be a part of it. I want to first of all thank everybody who is either here today right now or watching the recording a little later. I was absolutely thrilled that we had such a great response to and interest in the event, especially this year. I've had a lot of personal and professional experience with digital networks through the establishment of Indiana Memory. I was on some of the very first committees for that. And then the subsequent launch of Indiana Memory as a digital hub for DPLA in Indiana. So I've had my finger in this pot for quite some time, and it's exciting work to be a part of. Some of the partnerships that we developed with the other cultural heritage institutions in the state as a result of the work with Indiana Memory have been some of the most rewarding of my career. So I'm really grateful for those and for the ability to develop some new ones here in Ohio. You can go on the next slide, Jen. The work done to build up resources like the Ohio Digital Network and DPLA provided exceptional support for educators this spring and summer, and we should really give ourselves a pat on the back for that. It was a great example of how libraries continue to provide services even when their doors were temporarily closed. Having resources like the primary source sets and the accompanying teaching guides was a wonderful tool to give teachers throughout the country who had to very suddenly and without warning make a switch to remote learning that they were not anticipating. And then it has also provided a path for all libraries, archives, and museums to partner with schools, colleges, and universities to support their curricula. It's really exciting to see the work that's going on in our sister industry with museums as they're building the Museum for Digital Learning. It was just announced a big IMLS grant last week, and that's going to provide another bridge to strengthen our collaborations with other cultural heritage institutions. Oh, and nice Zoom backdrop. I should have said thank you to Toledo Lucas County and Jen for saving it so that it's mirrored and it shows correctly on my Zoom backdrop. So thank you all. Back to the introductions. Adding more resources and partners is really the best way to bolster the network, and keeping an eye on the trends that are going to affect the network. Trends like crowdsourcing and digital preservation is really going to enhance all the work that's been done so far by the State Library of Ohio staff, by our partners who have been part of ODN working groups and have been part of the network from the beginning. So I really appreciate all the work that everybody who is here today has done so far to build ODN up. As we all know, some of the most important lessons we can learn today are rooted in the similarities to the challenges that we faced as a society in the past. And so the role of ODN and DPLA in preserving that history so that we can all learn from it is just a really important endeavor and something that we should all be proud to be a part of. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be joining you guys throughout the day as much as I can, in and out. But I really look forward to celebrating all the work that you've done so far and working with all of you in the future. So thank you so much. And Penelope, I think I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Wendy.
Hi. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to let me show my video. It's not working. Now it is. Okay.
You look great.
Okay. I kept pushing the button. So I want to introduce Holly. We're really glad that she's able to be here with us today. Holly serves as the college archivist at Spelman College. Previously, she served as the African American Material Specialist in the Louise Round Wilson Special Collections Library at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She received her BA in History and Black Studies from the College of William and Mary, and an MA in History from Yale University, and her MS in Library and Information Science with a concentration in Archival Management from Simmons College. Holly has served as the chair of the Society of American Archivists and Diversity Committee, a co-chair of the Women's Collection Roundtable. Additionally, she is the proud co-author of the article, This Black Woman's Work, Exploring Archival Projects That Embrace the Identity of the Memory Worker, and the author of the piece, Radical Love, documenting underrepresented communities using principles of radical empathy. She is passionate about community archival advocacy related to collection from historically underdocumented communities. And we're really happy that she's here to talk to us about her work with those communities and her work at Spelman today. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you so much, Penelope. Can everyone hear me?
I'll
I
start.
can hear you. You sound great, Holly.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. And I think like Jen said, I really do like that idea of virtual grace. I will go ahead and say, obviously I'm at home and I live in the city. So hopefully you won't hear too much noise or traffic. And I will go ahead and share my screen as well. And everyone can see my screen?
Yep.
Yes. Looks
Coming
good
through.
for me, Holly.
Thank you so much. You know, sometimes you can't quite see the chat. So, okay, fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I would like to thank the ODN 2020 Fest Planning Committee for the invitation to be here, with special thanks to Penelope Shoemaker for all her assistance and support in preparing for this event. I would like to thank my friends and colleagues, some of whom are joining this conversation today, and several of whose work I will mention later in this discussion. I continue to learn from each of you, and you all inspire and encourage me personally and professionally. Lastly, I would like to take a few moments to have silent reflection for the individuals that we lost in 2020 that are still in our hearts and minds, and this critical political moment that we find ourselves in. It is my desire that we can emerge from this season a more just, unified society. As the iconic lesbian feminist activist Audre Lorde said, without community, there is no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? In Toni Cade Bambara's seminal novel, The Salt Eaters, spiritual healer Minnie Ransom asks Velma this pivotal question as Velma has come to a critical breaking point and breakdown in her life. I like to caution folks, that's all. No sense us wasting each other's time, sweetheart, Minnie continues. Just so's you're sure, sweetheart, and ready to be healed, because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you're well. Velma's crossroads of healing is within her hands, but as Minnie Ransom points out, and is illustrated throughout the story, it is a communal responsibility, and Velma's healing process has implications for the entire community. People who are seeking their own healing, intentionally and unintentionally. This oft-quoted passage is a powerful metaphor for considering what does it mean to tell, quote, whole, encompassing stories of individuals and communities. How does telling ethical and equitable stories collaboratively lead to a collective healing and a, quote, wholeness for communities? What is the relationship and role of archivists in partnership to facilitate access to materials and to tell these stories, particularly within the digital realm? Digital collections can facilitate broader access to collections, increasing their reach, but that accessibility can also increase the potential for harm, intentional and unintentional, for individuals and communities, particularly those that have been historically marginalized and face multiple forms of oppression. Archivists working in digital collections must be cognizant of the importance of community collaboration, creating and adhering to professional standards of ethics when undertaking digital projects, forging ethical and equitable collaborations with different communities, and understanding the broader implications of access and accessibility, as well as metadata and description. I'd like to begin by discussing a digital project that the Spelman Archives participated in that significantly amplified and increased access to some amazing collections documenting historically Black colleges and universities and their diverse constituents. Spelman College has educated women of the African diaspora since the late 19th century and has documented these women in the campus community just as long. Founded in 1881 as the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary, Spelman is one of two existing higher educational institutions currently that historically were created to educate Black women. Spelman sits within the Atlanta University Center, or AUC, a consortium of historically Black colleges and universities that include Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, and the Interdenominational Theological Seminary. Containing approximately 5,000 linear feet of collections, the Spelman Archives collect administrative and departmental records, publications, photographs, and other materials relating to the history of the college. The archives include more than 500 volumes of campus publications, such as the yearbooks, student newspapers, annual reports, and course catalogs. The Spelman photographic collections contain over 30,000 images that depict student life, campus architecture, homecoming, Founders Day, and many other topics from the 19th century to the present. As a component of the Women's Resource and Research Center, which was founded by Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall and houses the Comparative Women's Studies program at Spelman, the archives also collect records related to women of the African diaspora, particularly in the areas of social justice and civil rights activism, LGBTQ advocacy, and Black feminist theory. The two most heavily used special collections are the papers of lesbian feminist activist Audre Lorde and someone who you are already fortunate enough to see, filmmaker, writer, feminist, and cultural worker Toni Cade Bambara. In short, the collections of the Spelman Archives are unique representations of the diverse experiences of Black women and detail the rich history of the institution, its constituents, and the surrounding Black communities of Atlanta. In 2016, the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library Archives Research Center received a Council of Library and Information Resources, or CLEAR grant, to fund the digitization of publications and photographs from the AUC HBCUs. The project, entitled Our Story, was a 2.5-year collaborative grant-funded project between AUC Woodruff Library, Spelman Archives, and the Digital Library of Georgia, or the DLG. Through digital reformatting and a portal of publicly accessible collections on the AUC Woodruff Library's Digital Commons and the DLG, this project would broaden access to unique publications, periodical, theses, dissertations, and photographs documenting the history of the AUC, which is the largest consortia of HBCUs. Once completed, these archives related to the schools will be more digitally accessible and more scholarship will be more easily discoverable in various aspects of African American higher education, directly after emancipation of slavery to the 21st century, from the schools historically and currently part of the AUC. The Spelman archival collections that are part of the project include publications such as the Spelman Messenger, the official campus magazine, published from 1885 to the present, the Campus Mirror, a student-centered publication that was published from 1925 to 1950, the course catalogs, the Spelman Spotlight, student newspapers published from 1950 to the present, and Reflections, the Spelman's College Yearbook. Over 1,000 images from the photographic collections were digitized, including rare images from Spelman's Dance and Drama Department from 1930s to 2007. Many of these materials were accessible only on site, and some were rarely seen, if ever, publicly, particularly the photographs. A number of researchers were aware of the breadth and depth of Spelman and the other AUC collections, but many more were not. This project made a significant amount of material available from the largest consortium of HBCUs and provided critical access to local and remote researchers. Faculty, students, staff, genealogists, filmmakers, artists, and more have utilized the Spelman publications and photographs for course instruction, scholarly articles, and creative works. For example, members of the Spelman class of 1968, many of whom were involved in the civil rights activism on and off campus of the day, were able to utilize digitized images and publication from the collections to prepare for their reunion activities in 2018. It has become more critical than ever in this era of COVID-19 to be able to effectively provide access to these materials safely for users and the staff, as well as efficiently. HBCUs were founded out of necessity because of Jim Crow segregation and discrimination, and also there was a strong desire need for higher education in Black communities. Often the archives are the only place where you will find information about the college, the campus, community, as well as the surrounding African American neighborhoods, which include businesses, schools, families, etc. More than just campus news, these publications, as well as at other HBCUs, told news of the surrounding community of national significance about religious activities, civil rights, social issues, as well as international affairs. The student newspapers featured everything from homecoming to pageants to articles about apartheid and reproductive justice. These materials are critical for an encompassing view not only of the HBCUs, but Black communities nationally and internationally. So this project has significance not just for scholarly work, but also for family connections, to fill in pieces of history that often can't be found elsewhere, and to also amplify and activate Black history in ways that other archives and museums have not, or perhaps will not. The outright joy and appreciation I have heard directly, frequently from family conducting genealogical research on relatives that have attended Spelman reiterates not only the significance of these collections broadly, but how important it is that they can be accessed virtually. Additionally, this project was critical in disseminating and amplifying content by and about Black women from our perspectives, as diverse and varied as they are. When initially starting this project, the grant team had many discussions on what specific collections that would be digitized that would provide rich insight into the communities of the history of the school and their communities. There were conversations, of course, around copyright, fair use, ensuring we had the right to actually digitize these collections. We also employed best practices and standards of takedown policies, taking into consideration what might happen with content if there are concerns, complaints, or issues. As administrators of this project, we wanted to be aware of the perceptions and significance of this project, as well as to be self-aware enough to know there might be different reactions to this project. To date, the responses have been very positive, and communities have been excited about the ability to access these collections. The HBCUs that were part of this project had marked differently concerns around archival documentation and digital collections than predominantly white institutions or PWIs and repositories typically have. Often at PWIs and other archives, collections do not have documents from the voices of those that historically marginalized, written from their own perspectives. Many institutions have legacies of racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of systemic oppression that have also informed collecting policies and practices. Documentation about historically marginalized communities, such as LGBTQ communities, indigenous communities, people of color, women, incarcerated individuals, working class, and poor people, have frequently not been the source of collecting focuses. The subject of benign neglect at least, and at the most egregious, intentional erasure. Inadvertently, these frameworks can be replicated in the digital spaces if institutions are not willing to be cognizant of their own biases and transparent about the need to shift and grow and examine the historical practices. There can be the belief, again, that archives and archivists are neutral and therefore do not have any responsibility regarding the implications and for presenting and disseminating collections in the physical and digital realms. For example, consider the digitization of Klan records, lynching photographs, arrest records, memoirs of torture and violence in times of war, vivid discussions of abuse, documents and artifacts from indigenous communities presented without the appropriate protocols. These are collections that can have a powerful and perhaps painful and traumatic implication for individuals in the communities they represent. Presenting these types of materials without historical context, notes on harmful or offensive language, or enhanced community information as needed can perpetuate that pain and trauma, be it intentional or unintentional. Collectively, we must be concerned about the care in ethics as creating and administering digital collections, as well as the technical infrastructure and practical aspects of such projects. A practical foundation concerning ethical implications in archives overall is the radical empathy framework articulated by Michelle Caswell and Marika Saifor in their 2016 article. Radical empathy is defined as, quote, the ability to understand and appreciate another person's feelings, experiences, etc. To quote from the article, in a feminist ethics approach, archivists are seen as caregivers bound to records creators, subjects, users, and communities through a web of mutually effective responsibility, end quote. The proposed care ethics framework sits firmly within the social justice tradition in archival studies, even as it critiques and shifts it. In particular, the concerns over power differentials and inequities that are central to the social justice-oriented scholarship, end quote. This framework reiterates again the idea that archivists are not passive keepers of, quote, dead records. We are active in helping shape societal memory, and in fact, the decisions of what to keep and what not to keep through collection development policies and donor relations are inherently a political decision. Employing a framework of ethics in a digital environment can have its own particular challenges. There are usually not the face-to-face interactions with users when people encounter a document or object, and often there is no way to know the type of environment in which they are using these digital collections. Assessment of user engagement is not automatic or instantaneous in that moment. So what are the specific things to consider with digital collections in the 21st century? There are a number of institutions and collectives with useful resources for some best and emerging practices in digital collections with implications for ethics, accessibility, and description. There are also a number of projects employing these resources, with archivists and others collaboratively developing guidelines and protocols with communities. Please excuse me for a moment. Thank you. Many might be familiar with the Digital Library Federation, or DLF. DLF is, quote, a community of practitioners who advance research, learning, social justice, and the public good through the creative design and wise application of digital library technologies, end quote. Within the DLF Assessment Interest Group, the AIG Content Reuse Working Group is currently creating a digital content reuse assessment framework toolkit known as DCRAFT. This will be a, quote, open access, collaboratively developed toolkit that would detail available assessment tools, best practices, and a code of ethics for measuring the reuse of digital assets, facilitating both standardization and impact measurement in the digital field, end quote. The DCRAFT project team is developing these guidelines in an effort to consider the social and political overtures of those working in and impacted by GLAM environments, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and repositories, and the importance of aligning ethics, values, and accountability in the work process from which future peers draw. After reviewing input from the project advisory group, the project team will solicit input from the larger community of cultural heritage practitioners later this year. Project STAND, which stands for Student Activism Now Document, is another consortium of academic archives that serve as a clearinghouse for researchers for archival documentation about student activism, past and present. In fact, a sister colleague, Lael Hughes-Watkins, who was formerly at Kent State, conceived of this idea initially for institutions in Ohio. The Project STAND team also collectively collaborates with student organizations actively and has created the Archiving Student Activism Toolkit, a crucial resource that outlines building relationships between activists and archivists and includes an encompassing section on privacy and access relating to things to consider, as well as when donating physical or digital records for student activists. Documenting Ferguson, as well, based at Washington University in St. Louis, is, quote, a freely available resource that seeks to preserve and make accessible the digital media captured and created by community members following the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9th, 2014. The project has the ultimate goal of providing diverse perspectives on the events in Ferguson and the resulting social dialogue, end quote. To quote from another article, Archiving Digital Media, From Documenting Ferguson to Documenting the Now, by Rose Miyatsu on the Washington University Library blog, quote, from the very beginning of the Documenting Ferguson project, collaborators had to address issues around the ethical use of social media in order to avoid creating an archive of materials that users would not want preserved and shared in this way. Documenting Ferguson had internet users submit their own materials voluntarily, end quote. This project facilitated the creation of the Documenting the Now initiative, which not only focuses on documenting social and digital media created in the wake of activism and the protest movements, but also much needed, as well as ongoing conversations between activists, archivists, scholars, journalists, and others around the ethical use of social media content. DocNow and Project STAN have been able to facilitate several critical in-person symposium dialogues with key conversations among diverse stakeholders. The Plateau People's Web Portal is another collaborative digital project between Indigenous communities, academic programs, libraries, and archives that highlight critical community work. Quote, the Plateau People's Web Portal is a collaboration between the Spokane Tribe of Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe of Indians, the Confederated Tribe of Warm Springs, the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes of the Flathead Reservation, the Nez Perce Tribe, the Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation and Native American Programs at Washington State University. This portal is a gateway to Plateau people's cultural materials held in multiple repositories. The materials in the portals have been chosen and curated by tribal representatives. Each item has one or more records associated with it, as well as added traditional knowledge and cultural narratives to enhance and enrich understanding of many audiences. And that is taken from the Plateau Portal's website. Mukatu content management system as well, which was born from a collaboration with the Warunga community members and housed at Washington State University's Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation, is another example of a collaborative project that now has broader implications for cultural heritage institutions. Mukatu is an open source digital platform built with Indigenous communities to manage and share digital cultural heritage, a quote, grassroots project aiming to empower communities to manage, share, and exchange their digital heritage in culturally relevant and ethically minded ways, end quote. The website explicitly states, quote, we are committed to maintaining an open, community-driven approach to Mukatu's continued development, end quote. It is particularly important to note this archive and project was formulated using the Indigenous community's own protocols. Lastly, the Cataloging Lab website has a compilation of archives, libraries, and museums with trauma and bias statements around collection materials, including initiatives around conscious editing, which is a good place to provide an overview of what select cultural heritage institutions are doing around harmful or offensive language in description and bias in cataloging. This list includes statements about problematic language in both description and resources themselves, as well as statements about resources that will frequently discuss other ongoing projects. The Digital Public Library's Black Women's Suffrage Project has an encompassing harmful language statement, which our colleagues Shanae Moraine and Audrey Altman will discuss at a session later today. The aforementioned projects and resources were created deliberately and collaboratively with various stakeholders in the conversation. They represent long-term conscious efforts to provide access to digital content equitably, but also with professional integrity. It is critical to be transparent and not cloud processes and procedures in mystery for donors, patrons, users, our colleagues, ourselves. This is not about censorship, but again, having professional empathy and critical understanding and taking into account how to present potentially complex, problematic materials within the appropriate context and conscious. It behooves us to question the creation of languages, systems, standards, protocols, controlled vocabularies that are created by the certain structures and who is left out. We can commit to doing better, to just not be inclusive, but have equitable, just frameworks of description. I would like to conclude today by telling a story about my own personal encounter with collections in a virtual space to demonstrate the power that digital archives have. Scrolling through Instagram 2 days ago, a post on the I Remember Our History account gave me pause. The account shared a post from the Cultivator Bookstore in North Carolina on Mrs. Katie Hart, who established the first library services for African Americans in Hertford County North Carolina in 1931. In 1940, after donations from the community in her own pocket, Mrs. Hart purchased a bookmobile to get books out to the rural community. And in 1941, she opened the Hertford County Negro Library on Murphy Street in Winton, North Carolina. What made my heart leap with joy and excitement is that my maternal great aunt Marie Hart Manley is the namesake of Mrs. Katie Marie Hart. Aunt Marie, who was wicked hilarious, loved Pepsi, loved her family and her nieces, enjoyed a good plate, and attending Philippi Baptist Church in Cofield, North Carolina, drove the bookmobile herself for several years. She would give my sister and I numerous books, an absolute delight for two bookworms. When she passed away in 2016, my cousin Chris found 2 card catalog notes in her purse, which he passed on to me and that I still have this day. After expressing my joy on the Cultivator Bookshop Instagram account and promptly sharing the post with 10,000,001 people, I then went down the rabbit hole of researching Mrs. Hart's life and work. I had grown up knowing about Mrs. Hart, but did not fully realize her impact on Black literacy and education in Eastern North Carolina. I found other websites and publications, which led me to reach back out to my cousin, mother, and other family members to ask questions about Aunt Marie, the bookmobile, and other family. I found myself planning a trip to Hertford County if I'm able to make it home to Virginia for Christmas. I went on a 2-hour research adventure, all because of a single post with a digital image of a photograph from a 1939 genealogical book about North Carolina. Digital collections. From a post on Instagram, a church obituary in a public library, a ship's manifest in the state archives, or a yearbook photograph from a college, can have a profound impact not only on individuals, but entire communities. They can link people across time, space, and generations to supplement critical parts of cultural heritage across continents. These digitized materials can also invoke feelings of trauma, anger, and pain for communities and individuals. Because of the power of archives and memory, archivists and other cultural heritage workers must be cognizant of the role we play in helping construct societal memory and build ethical, equitable, collaborative relationships with diverse partners in working to provide access to collections, physically, but also digitally. This is particularly important when working with sensitive materials in historically underrepresented communities whose experiences typically have been not highlighted in the written historical record. We must be transparent and honest about harmful institutional legacies of oppression and neglect, and work deliberately and honestly to tell complex, often problematic, but crucial histories. In this age of extensive digital content, we must consider the implications of the reach of our collections virtually and what we can do to support diverse researchers across the globe. We must continue to be self-aware not only as individuals, but as a profession about how we can be ethical stewards of collections that have significant and mean so much to so many communities. I would like to again extend a huge thank you to the ODNFest 2020 Planning Committee, with particular helps for coordination to John Deweese, Jen Johnson, Evan Struble, and again, an extra special thanks to Penelope Shoemaker for all her patience. And a huge thank you to everyone who attended today. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Holly. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. It looks like we have one question already from Anna Marie about the digital collections for the Woodruff Library, and that there's an extensive takedown notice. And have you had anyone contact you about taking down items, and how is that handled? Or do you know anything about that?
In terms of the Spelman materials, thank you, Penelope, and again, thank you. I apologize who asked the question. I missed the name.
Anna Marie.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Anna Marie, asking about the takedown. From the Spelman materials, we have not. And that's not to say that there, couldn't be down the line, whether it's harmful material. I think particularly, about articles and perspectives possibly, but we haven't yet. But, I'm glad to have, processes in place and for it to be a discussion rather than an immediate no, or, just to have that. So thank you for that. But people, one thing I didn't mention about the members of 1968 coming, we frequently have reunioning classes that come into the archives to do research for their reunion class, which is typically held in the spring during commencement. And it's just a joy to see the excitement of a group of alumni that get together, and you can see them reliving experiences they had at college in Atlanta and the AUC. But that is typically the alumni, that are in and around the Atlanta area. So when we're able to, share this content virtually, just the excitement that, you can receive, not only from the genealogical research, but the people that experience it and the memories that it evokes, and then the stories that they then tell is really priceless, again. So thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you. We'll wait another second and see if anyone has any more questions. What do you think is your favorite item in the Spelman collection that you like to share? Or do you have a few that are just things that excite you?
Oh man, that's a hard question, Penelope, because we really have such rich things. But I would have to say my favorite collection are really the photographs. I just have a strong love of seeing photographic representations, particularly of Black communities. Again, thinking about where my own family is from. I'm born and raised in Hampton, Virginia, but my family is from Eastern North Carolina. So I think really, and just seeing the breadth of images, early students would write frequently back to Sophia Packard and Harriet Giles, the founding members and first two presidents of Spelman. And they would send a lot of images of their families, or some did missionary work in the Congo and other parts of the continent of Africa. So I think that helps broaden what we think we know about Spelman, about, Black women, and there were students coming from South America and other places. There were students coming from the continent of Africa to go to school. So I think it just broadens our perspective about what we think goes on. And plus they're just beautifully, graphically, there are a variety of different types of formats and just beautifully diverse. So yeah, that's always a hard question, but I think the photos really are my favorite.
Yeah, the photos are nice. They give an idea of the time periods that we're talking about. And another question I think that's on a lot of people's mind, how has COVID affected the archival work at your university and, you know, at Spelman, or how has it not affected it?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Thank you. So we are like a lot of repositories, we are currently closed for in-person research, and Spelman College is all remote. There are no on campus, or it's not a hybrid. I have to say, which I'm grateful for, given the numbers of cases in the state of Georgia. So that has certainly limited who, the ability to have in-person research. Myself and my colleague will go in alternate days during the week into our office space, and we're able to telework the other days, which I'm grateful for. And in that, still, and feeling safe going into the office. The campus is smaller, and I will say, and this is something on a personal note that we cannot probably all relate to. If some of you are going, into offices and you might be the only one, it's an eerie feeling. It's an odd time to be the only person sometimes you see on a campus or in your building. But I'm grateful to feel safe and be able to. We have been doing a lot of digital reference and course instruction remotely. And I think that's again one of the things that unites us. We're all going through this very strange and different time in a different way. So speaking of grace again, it's, people have continued to extend me grace, and I will continue to extend it, as researchers are trying to, or, students are trying to get things done for classes. So, and I'm, grateful that we can, and I have to say, this is what's been sustaining me in this challenging period: family, friends, this work.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think, again, going back to that idea of grace and extending, everyone's kind of dealing with it, the same thing, but slightly differently. Jen says, thank you for using and teaching her the term PWI for predominantly white institutions. It's so important to label and describe across the board instead of assuming one type of institution is the default. Do you have any other thoughts on that? Or just, again, thank you for, it's interesting to think about the way that we label things and how to do it better.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. And then I think, I think sometimes we get in an age where we're not able to speak frankly and respectfully about things, but transparency is important. And having attended some predominantly white institutions for my own educational expertise, and having worked at some, there are, and to be, my identity as a Black woman, a memory worker from the South, I have a very specific marked experiences in those spaces, as not only as a professional, but as a person. And, transparently, it can be, isolating, you can be micro and macro aggressed, so again, these are just the real lived experiences that I have, speaking to myself personally, that are often built into the foundation, and people, can perpetuate the ideologies around, even, power about what's important, whose voices are present, like I mentioned, even in the archives. And I think sometimes we're not able to be transparent in the profession about, the legacies of the systemic oppression, what that does to the communities who are represented by these records, what that does to people working in the profession. So I have just been very gratified, again, in all the projects I mentioned. I didn't want to, start naming names because I would worry I would be, leaving someone out, but thinking again of the work of Lael Hughes Watkins, Burgess Jules, Ed Summers, Stacey Williams. There are a number of people who are writing and doing this work. Just kind of the idea, I know in Michelle Caswell and Marika Seifor have talked about dismantling white supremacy in archives. And it's a very real thing. These are systemic things beyond an individual. So I just think my thoughts on that are, just being honest and transparent about the legacy, particularly I think of educational institutions, but all cultural heritage, and I myself, as an individual, but Spelman is an institution, we want to be self-aware and not perpetuate harm on our constituents or ideologies and master narratives either. So that was a little bit of a long-winded, probably all over the place answer, but I just appreciate, being able to be transparent and open and honest about the historical legacies of a lot of these institutions, and to go about the work of dismantling this. And again, the collaborative relationships, but being slow and conscious and deliberate, in the unfortunate aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and a lot of the protest. I think a lot of certainly businesses and institutions were quick to come out with statements supporting Black Lives Matter and other things, which is a positive thing. Now it's like, what is the actual actionable items other than, that the institutions and individuals can do? And, being really deliberate about that rather than just doing, I think, some things for the cachet of the moment. So thank you.
We appreciate your transparency and you're willing to talk about these things. Peter says, have you had the opportunity to use the Merkutu content management system? And he hasn't heard of it before, but he wondered if you've been able to use it.
Yes, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Peter. I have not used it directly, but I know I have other colleagues who had, certainly other colleagues working with Native American communities and materials. And I think specifically kind of thinking of that project, the Plateau Peoples Project as well, was one of the aspects. And I mean, and I remember going to a talk and one of our colleagues, Trevor James Bond, who worked with the project, was speaking about it at a symposium at Harvard. And again, I think just reiterating really the collaborative nature of the project, that it grew out and it grew out of a connection with the community. And I think I just really want to emphasize that aspect of, kind of what I'm talking about, building partnerships around digital and physical, anything really when you're doing a project. I, have had been put in the position or seen sometimes where, in my experience, is primarily academic institutions, there's an idea for a collaboration, but the idea is that representatives or from the institution will go to the community and like, hey, this is what we want to do for you. Be grateful. We've got some money. Just do these things. We can check it off, instead of really listening, and how else do you begin a relationship? By talking and listening to, needs of a particular individual, community, organization, cultural heritage institution. So the thing that I've gleaned specifically from that particular project and a lot of these others is it started as a conversation of mutual respect, with all parties bringing something to the table, not the idea that these institutions, big or small, are doing people a favor. You know what I mean? And with that, the possibility for co-optation is very strong. So again, didn't mean to go off on that answer a bit, but yeah, I'm really excited about that. And again, the fact that a lot of the resources, at least that I know of, and I know there are many other amazing projects, are open source and are kind of ongoing works and open to future work, so there can be used freely, which is a very positive thing.
Yeah, Peter says as a follow-up, he's going to install it on his new server. So thank you for sharing that resource. Anna Marie followed up to her earlier question. Her concern is the permission to reproduce likenesses of people that were recorded prior to digitization in the web. And in their collection, they have recordings of high-profile people, such as Alex Haley, and would love to share the material, but she's interested in whether, since it was made before digitization was a thing, and, how do you build your takedown policy around that?
No, that's an excellent question, Anna Marie. I know we get into kind of conversations around that in fair use, and did someone give their permission for something to, be up. And I think the concern is particularly, like you said, around recordings of things or recordings of speeches. So I will just say in our case, and this might be a little different because we actively work with the estates of Audre Lorde and Tony Cade Bambara, as well as some of their family, we were able, thankfully, from a generous gift from the Dr. Guy Shefton, the Women's Center, to get the audiovisual content from Audre Lorde and Tony Cade Bambara's papers digitized after a number of years. So now that content has been digitized and it's available for researchers, but right now it is on site. It is not available digitally. And I think, just that's one of, the reasons to be very mindful about, I think, what we post. And how, sometimes we think, what is the likelihood that someone will be upset, or is it disconcerting? But, just you're being mindful about also, I think, the accessibility. And then again, the way we think about things, if someone donates a collection to me, but that other person didn't give their, permission. So in addition to other things, that's why one of the reasons currently where we are providing access, but not as expansively, and for a number of reasons, if that makes sense. So I think, like you said, just to follow with Anna Marie, there are a number of the resources, I think, that I mentioned that have, discussions around whether it's submitting material or taking things down, institutional policies as well. But I think, I don't think I really articulated that when I spoke, but that was one question I had, like, it's a question, it's not a right answer. Like, if we want to provide access, what are the implications of, putting this speech or putting this document online, even as innocuous as the item might seem. So that's a long way, again, of saying, I think having a takedown, policy, and also to, include other colleagues in the conversation, just not be one person making that decision, is really helpful. And what to do if someone does approach you about taking something down.
Thank you. In addition to that, she asked if your PowerPoint slides will be shared, and we'd love to share them on your website, on our website, if so. You have a lot of great links, so we will definitely do that if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Another question is, from Jasmine, are there current initiatives to collect student activism materials for modern movements, and what ethical protocols are in place or would be in place to protect student identities?
That's a wonderful question, Jasmine, and I might embarrass Jasmine a little bit. She's a wonderful student herself who has done a lot of great work thinking about outreach and archives. So I hope that didn't embarrass her too much, but I'm delighted that she is here today. So Spelman is actually a part of Project STAND, which I'm excited to be, in those conversations with other great colleagues who work directly with students in student organizations doing this work. I'm sorry, I just got distracted. I saw my sister, full disclosure, posted in the chat. So it's always exciting to see, and I saw my best friend earlier. So I'm just really appreciative for all the friends as well as family that could attend. So thank you, sister. Love you. And back to the Jasmine's question. So we do, and I actually put out a call earlier this summer on our website that we would like to connect and collaborate, thank you, Evan, with current student activists and alumni who are doing this type of work. I think by the nature of our connection to the Women's Resource and Research Center, which is the most radical progressive space on Spelman's campus, and I'll backtrack a little to explain, to say that, so the AUC library that I mentioned also, has an archives, and that is the library for all the HBCUs in the consortium. So Spelman's archives, we are actually a separate entity on campus. So that hopefully that explains a little bit why some, might see the unique and what I think is a wonderful opportunity of being connected to an academic unit who is actively doing programs and progressive work. So I think because of the nature of our connection in previous work and collaboration with student activist organizations to, find documents, to do programming, we've already been having those conversations. So now I wanted to put out a broader call, particularly in the wake of this political moment and a lot of the activism that has really been going on this summer. So we've gotten some, good response, or people are interested. And I think Jasmine makes a good point, really sharing and disseminating that Project STAND toolkit is one thing that I think is a good model for the ethical implications of student, working with student organizations, past and current, as well as the ethical implications of taking this material. Again, right now, whether it's collecting articles, flyers, pictures, there's not a desire to, the infrastructure, but a desire to immediately put things up online right now, because again, we're thinking of, we don't want to cause harm to anyone, that these materials can be used for surveillance. And like you said, without people's explicit permission, particularly in this moment. So I think really relying on the good open relationships we've had in using these resources as a guide and a toolkit for our own collection development policies are something that have been very helpful and effective, and that we'll still work toward.
Thank you for your reminders to be thoughtful. And like, I think sometimes we err on the side of, oh, well, who's going to come after us, but also thinking about how it could, like for that takedown notice, but rather, how could it affect the person being shared. And we're so glad, by the way, to see that your friends and family are able to attend. Thank you for coming. That's great. We're glad that you're here. And we'll wait a couple more minutes. Again, you can put those questions in the chat or the Q&A. We're excited.
And I hope everyone will feel free to email at hsmith, and I'm happy to type it. It'll be on the slides, and I'll type it in the chat for if you're interested in the project or anything.
We have a couple more questions from the Q&A. What accessibility measures is Spelman taking in regard to digital archive content? From Abigail.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Penelope? I apologize.
What accessibility measures is Spelman taking in regard to archival content, like online and things like that?
Online. So right now, the digital content that we have hosted through the AUC project is the primary, that's the main digital content that we have online. Right now, we do not have an internal content management system or digital repository at this time. So that is definitely something, as we're looking to, grow our collection, that we're being cognizant of. And we're also very grateful to have our colleagues at AUC Woodruff Library, that is a stellar, digital services and program, as well as the Archives Research Center. So we're very grateful to be able to connect and collaborate that way. But there's certainly a number of other collections that I really would like to see digitized, thinking of the founders, Sophia Packard and Harriet Giles. People often, get a lot of questions about the interest of, the connection between two white Northern missionaries and the diverse Black communities in Atlanta working together to found this school. So that's something that would be a very useful, and I think it's a very rich and very interesting, those are very rich and interesting collections. So thank you for that question. We're still, we've got a lot of exciting things to work on, and a lot of really, I can say that as one of the stewards, it's not any arrogance on my part to say that the collections at Spelman are rich and amazing and deserve a high level of prominence. And how to facilitate, increased knowledge and awareness and use about, and frankly, like you said, accessibility and in thoughtful, equitable ways for the diversity of collections.
Thank you. Another question from David is, for permission for use of photos in this moment, is verbal consent sufficient, or should photo releases be used?
In terms of
I think perhaps, like you said, in this moment, so maybe current pictures, you know, if you took a picture of someone and they verbally consented for it to be put online, is that enough, or do you feel photo releases are important, like for written photo releases as opposed to verbal?
I think those types of things are very important. And I'm thinking of, some photographers, who have been, photographing at some of the protests, just also being cognizant to try and not take direct pictures of people's faces or to post, like you said, without their consent. Now, I know, in a moment, maybe a verbal consent, is quicker, more easier, but I just really think that we on our end should encourage ourselves to be as thorough as possible. And again, just kind of thinking about, so if we have a number of photographs from a, a protest, there might be some students, there might not be. Again, like if we're going to put them online, what is, the purpose and the point really? And, if a student says, hey, I don't feel comfortable, or anybody, like, again, what are you going to do? So I just think we need to be as thorough as possible. Again, I'm thinking takedown policies and all the written documentation that we can. And also, kind of thinking in our way, thinking again, like the photographer, how we can really work to document these moments, but not in a way that feels like, again, surveillance or doing things intentionally without people's consent, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And he did add that he was talking about current pictures of someone protesting. So
yes,
I think
yes.
your answer was on point for that. And we have a few minutes left, so we'll wait and see if we have any last questions. Is there anything that you've thought of that you wanted to add, Holly, while we're waiting for those questions?
I just, it's just so funny how things happen. So really that image that I showed of Mrs. Katie Hart, and it was from, I have the name of the book. So it was done in 1939, and it was basically like a genealogical history from 1889 to 1939. And I think it was called the Hoskie era of Hertford County. Now, Hoskie is the name of the town in Hertford County. And I'd never seen that book before. I'd heard of Mrs. Katie Hart because my Aunt Marie, and then when I went into, this field, there were jokes, but it was just really, it was quite emotional, impactful, to just, and not knowing, I think, knowing, Miss Katie Hart, drove the bookmobile, she did a lot for literacy, but just the breadth and richness of her life and lived experience. And that's if any of you all, ever been to North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina is a very small rural part of North Carolina, but what she was able to do and just see that legacy, continue on was, it's like, it's like, it was more than a fun fact. I felt that very deeply, and I just felt so connected in that way and then I asked my cousin, I know we have pictures of Aunt Marie with the bookmobile, and then to think that that's helped nurture my love of reading, it was very impactful. And when I reached back out to, I posted it on their site, I think I tagged them in it, and also seeing the really great progressive work that the bookshop was doing, the Cultivator Bookshop that posted it, it was just a very impactful experience. So I think, sometimes we as colleagues can maybe become numb, not numb, but it's like, oh, this is great. But when you really see someone, either in tears or amazed because they can see a record of a parent that might be deceased or a loved one, or, I just think about how impactful, it is to be able to share those things. And thank you so much, Cassandra, my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra, who we are a small but mighty team of two in the Spelman Archives, is just in the chat. So give some love and recognition to Miss Cassandra. But yeah, so I think, anyway, again, Penelope, not to go on too much about that, but just, and again, it was, and some people might have a debate about, Instagram or whatever, social media, but there are a lot of wonderful accounts started by, archives and archivists that exist,
Thank you.
yeah, so that's
Oh,
significant.
yeah, I mean, the personal connection is really valuable and important. Thank you. We had one more follow-up about the accessibility question. Abigail asked, she's asking about the context of visual or hearing impairments, for example. How is Spelman handling that on their website, or can you comment on that?
That's a very excellent question, Abigail. And honestly, right now, I am not 100% sure what accessibility around what AUC does on their digital content management system, because again, our collections are on that website. So I can honestly say I'm not 100% sure in terms of access, and usability for people that might have challenges. I do think that is, critical. I think when doing digital projects, I was fortunate enough to attend seminars from, and I'm forgetting the name of the organization right now, please excuse me, but it was specifically focused on around concerns of accessibility in digital humanities projects and digital collections. So what do you do with someone who has challenges, with vision, and just being cognizant of the fact, again, things I think that we take for granted. Your color scheme might, be, not is it might be too, distracting, too much. Are you ensuring that people with, digital readers can use this material? So I think having that sensibility really opened my awareness to things that I wasn't cognizant of, and will, when we move forward on some more of our own digital projects, that will be in the infrastructure. And if anyone has any tools or suggestions specifically around different accessibility for sites, I would love to also know more about that as well.
Sure. Thank you. I think if we don't have any more questions, we'll just have a slightly longer break. We're going to be back at 11:15 for a presentation on Wikimedia Commons and DPLA from John DeWeese from Toledo, our gracious host, and Dominic from DPLA. Again, I want to thank you, Holly, for this wonderful discussion and all these information and things that you shared. I can't wait to dig into some of those links and look at them in more detail. Thank you.
Again, thank you everyone for being here early in the morning. I just really appreciate it. And again, a huge thank you to the committee for the, invitation, and a huge thank you to Penelope for her patience and and work. And just want to extend really my love and compassion and concern to everybody in these challenging times, that we can continue to hold and uplift and liberate each other. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. All right, we'll see everyone back at 11:15.